Chapter 14, A 4-Day Planet, by H. Beam Piper. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 4-Day Planet. Chapter 14, The Rescue. The scout boat from the Pequod came in about 30 minutes later, from up the ravine where the forest fire was sending up flame and smoke. It passed over the boat and the hut beside it, and the crowd of us outside, and I could see Oscar in the machine gunner's seat aiming a portable audio-visual telecast camera. After he got a view of us, cheering and waving our arms, the boat came back and let down. We ran to it, all of us except the man with the broken leg, and a couple who didn't have enough clothes to leave the fire, and as the boat opened I could hear Oscar saying, "Now I turn you over to Walter Boyd, the Times correspondent with the Javelin castaways." He gave me the camera when he got out, followed by his gunner, and I got a view of them, and of the boat lifting and starting west to guide the ships in. Then I shut it off and said to him, "What's this about Bish Ware? You said he was the one who started the search." "That's right," Oscar said. "About 30 hours after you left port, he picked up some things that made him think the Javelin had been sabotaged. He went to your father, and he contacted me. Mohandas Feinberg and I still had our ships in port, and started calling the Javelin by screen. When he couldn't get response, your father put out a general call to all hunter ships. Nip Spazzoni reported boarding the Javelin, and then went searching the area where he thought you'd been hunting, picked up your locator signal, and found the Javelin on the bottom with her bow blown out, and the boat berth open, and the boat gone. We all figured you'd head south with the boat, and that's where we went to look." "Well, Bish Ware, he was dead drunk the last I heard of him," Joe Kyvelson said. Just an act," Oscar said. "That was to fool the city cops, and anybody else who needed fooling. It worked so well that he was able to crash a party Steve Ravik was throwing at Hunter's Hall after the meeting. That was where he picked up some hints that Ravik had a spy in the Javelin crew. He spent the next 20 or so hours following that up, and heard about your man Divas straining his back. He found out what Divas did on the Javelin, and that gave him the idea that whatever the sabotage was, it would be something to the engines. What did happen, by the way?" A couple of us told him, interrupting one another. He nodded. "That was what Nip Spazzoni thought when he looked at the ship. Well, after that, he talked to your father and to me, and then your father began calling, and we heard from Nip." You could see that it absolutely hurt Joe Kyvelson to have to owe his life to Bish Ware. "Well, it's lucky anybody listened to him," he grudged. "I wouldn't have." "No, I guess maybe you wouldn't," Oscar told him, not very cordially. "I think he did a mighty sharp piece of detective work myself." I nodded, and then, all of a sudden, another idea, under Bish Ware reformation of, hit me. Detective work. That was it. We could use a good private detective agency in Port Sandor. Maybe I could talk him into opening one. He could make a go of it. He had all kinds of contacts. He was handy with a gun. And if he recruited a couple of tough but honest citizens who were also handy with guns and built up a protective and investigative organization, it would fill a long-felt need and at the same time give him something beside Balder honey rum to take his mind off whatever he was drinking to keep from thinking about. If he only stayed sober half the time, that would be a 50% success. Ramon Llewellyn was wanting to know whether anybody done anything about Al Divas. "We didn't have time to bother with any Al Divases," Oscar said. "As soon as Bish figured out what had happened aboard the Javelin, we knew you'd need help, and need it fast. He's keeping an eye on Al for us till we get back." "That's if he doesn't get any drunker and forget," Joe said. Everybody, even Tom, looked at him in angry reproach. "We better find out what he drinks and buy you a jug of it, Joe," Oscar's gunner told him. The Helldiver, which had been closest to us when our signal had been picked up, was the first ship in. She led down into the ravine, after some maneuvering around, and Mohandas Feinberg and half a dozen of his crew got off with an improvised stretcher on a lifter, and a lot of blankets. We got our broken leg case aboard, and Abdullah Monahan, and the man with the broken wrist. There were more ships coming, so the rest of us waited. Joe Kyvelson should have gone on the Helldiver to have his broken arm looked at, but a captain's always the last man off, so he stayed. Oscar said he'd take Tom and Joe and Glenn Morrell and me on the Pequod. I was glad of that. Oscar and his mate and his navigator are all bachelors, and they use the Pequod to throw parties on when they're not hunting, so it is more comfortably fitted than the usual hunter ship. Joe decided not to try to take anything away from the boat. He was going to do something about raising the Javelin, and the salvage ship could stop here and pick everything up. "Well, one thing," Oscar told him. "Bring that machine gun, and what small arms you have. I think things are going to get sort of rough in Port Sandor in the next 20 or so hours." I was beginning to think so myself. The men who had gotten off the Helldiver, and the ones who got off Corkscrew Finnegan's Dirty Gertie and Nip Spazzoni's Bulldog, were all talking about what was going to have to be done about Steve Ravik. Bombing Javelin would have been a good move for Ravik if it had worked. It hadn't, though, and now it was likely to be the thing that would finish him for good. It wasn't going to be any picnic either. He had his gang of hoodlums, and he could count on Morton Hallstock's 20 or 30 city police. They'd put up a fight, and a hard one. And they were all together, and the Hunter fleet was coming in one ship at a time. I wondered if the Ravik-Hallstock gang would try to stop them at the waterfront, or concentrate at Hunter's Hall, or the municipal building to stand siege. I knew one thing, though. However things turned out, there was going to be an awful lot of shooting in Port Sandor before it was over. Finally, everybody had gotten onto one ship or another but Oscar and his gunner, and the Kyvelsons and Morrell and myself. Then the Pequod, which had been circling around at 5,000 feet, let down and we went aboard. The conning tower was twice as long as usual on a hunter ship, and furnished with a lot of easy chairs and a couple of couches. There was a big combination view and communication screen, and I hurried to that and called the times. Dad came on as soon as I finished punching the wavelength combination. He was in his shirt sleeves, and he was wearing a gun. I guess we made kind of a show of ourselves, but, after all, he'd come within an ace of being all out of family, and I'd come within an ace of being all out, period. After we got through with the happy reunion, I asked him what was the situation in Port Sandor. He shook his head. "Not good, Walt. The word's gotten around that there was a bomb planted aboard the Javelin, and everybody's taking just one guess who did it. We haven't expressed any opinions one way or another yet. We've been waiting for confirmation." "Set for recording," I said. "I'll give you the story as far as we know it." He nodded, reached one hand forward out of the picture, and then nodded again. I began with our killing the monster and going down to the bottom after the cutting up and the explosion. I told him what we had seen after leaving the ship and circling around it in the boat. The condition of the hull looked very much like the effect of a charge of high explosive exploding in the engine room, I finished. "We got some views of it, transmitted in by Captain Spazzoni of the Bulldog," he said. "Captain Cortlandt of the Spaceport Police has expressed the opinion that it could hardly be anything but a small demolition bomb." "Would you say accident can be ruled out?" "I would. There was nobody in the engine room at the time. We were resting on the bottom, and all hands were in the wardroom." "That's good enough," Dad said. "We'll run it as very convincing and almost conclusive evidence of sabotage." He'd shut off the recorder for that. "Can I get the story of how you abandoned ship and landed now?" His hand moved forward, and the recorder went on again. I gave a brief account of our experiences in the boat, the landing and wreck, and our camp, and the firewood cutting, and how we had repaired the radio. Joe Kyvelson talked for a while, and so did Tom and Glenn Morrell. I was going to say something when they finished, and I sat down on one of the couches. I distinctly remember leaning back and relaxing. The next thing I knew, Oscar Fujisawa's mate was shaking me awake. "We're inside of Port Sandor," he was telling me. I mumbled something, and then sat up, and found that I had been lying down and that somebody had thrown a blanket over me. Tom Kyvelson was still asleep under a blanket on the other couch across from me. The clock over the instrument panel had moved 8 GS hours. Joe Kyvelson wasn't in sight, but Glenn Morrell and Oscar were drinking coffee. I went to the front window, and there was a scarlet glow on the horizon ahead of me. That's another sight Cesario Vieira will miss if he takes his next reincarnation off Fenris. Really, it's nothing but damp, warm air, blown up from the exhaust of the city's main ventilation plant, condensing and freezing as it hits the cold air outside, and floodlighted from below. I looked at it for a while, and then got myself a cup of coffee, and when I'd finished it, I went to the screen. It was still tuned to the times, and Mohandas Feinberg was sitting in front of it, smoking one of his twisted black cigars. He had a big 10mm Sturberg stuffed into the waistband of his trousers. "You guys poked along," he said. "I always thought the Pequod was fast. We got in 3 hours ago." "Who else is in?" "Corkscrew and some of his gang are here at the Times now. Bulldog and Slasher just got in a while ago. Some of the ships that were farthest west and didn't go to your camp have been in quite a while. We're having a meeting here. We are organizing the Port Sandor Vigilance Committee and Renegade Hunters Cooperative." End of Chapter 14.